it's like my jaw just dropped because I'm just like, this is unbelievable. Like, it's hard to even describe what he did with that role.
Exactly what you wanna say, what you wanna say. Exactly what you wanna say, what you wanna say.
Hey everybody, Rini here. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, if you're new here, welcome. If you're not, welcome back. Yesterday, I went to see Michael, the new biodrama that dropped about the life of the famous, the legendary King of Pop, Michael Jackson. I was so excited to see it because, in true transparency, I've always been an MJ fan. I'm a huge MJ fan. When I'm scrolling, whenever an MJ video pops up on my feed, I'm stopping to watch it. I'm probably gonna date myself at this point, but I grew up listening to his music. He was alive. Very much so. I would buy his albums. I would buy his CDs. Okay, at some point, yeah, CDs and cassettes. Okay, I would buy his CDs. I would like listen to the lyrics. I would watch all his videos. I'm a huge MJ fan. Okay, I know his concerts, his videos. I just look. So I'm just prefacing this by saying what the situation is. Okay, so that being said, I went to see the movie. Let's see, how are we going to start this? Are we going to start, let's just start with a synopsis of who the people are in this film. So you probably all have heard now that Michael's own nephew, Jafar Jackson, plays him in the movie. Jafar is Jermaine's son. He plays Michael. Coleman Domingo plays the infamous father, Joseph Jackson. Nia Long plays the mother. I'm going to give a special shout out to Juliano Valdi, who plays the young Michael. He deserves the same amount of shine as anybody else because he played that role down. Okay, it was incredible. I'm just going to say this. If you're going to go by individual performances, right? We'll get into the meat of the movie a little bit later on, but I'm just saying, based on these actors and what they bring to the screen, especially Coleman Domingo and Jafar Jackson and Juliano, those three performances alone are worth going to see this film, regardless of how you feel about the content, regardless of how, if you let the critics' opinions or whatever affect you when you go see it. Those three performances alone, if you're a fan of movies, if you're a fan of the art and craft of acting and what actors can bring to the screen, it's worth seeing this film. That alone. Because Juliano playing young Michael was incredible. Like, the nuances, just being that young and playing that role and dealing with Joseph and everything that went on in a household, incredible. Coleman Domingo in his role as Joseph, Oscar nomination. He should win. Okay, he embodied Joseph. And for anybody who saw Jackson's The American Dream, right? This was a miniseries that came on TV years ago, decades ago. But it was like a 5-part, like 20-something hour, like docu-series on the Jacksons, right? That everybody saw. And if you haven't seen it, try to see it. I don't even know where you will find that now. But Angela Bassett was in it. Go to bed, Joseph.
The boys are young men now. They have traveled all over the world. They have millions of fans. What are you going to do? Ask them to go out, get a switch off a tree, bring it in here so you can beat them with it. Go to bed, Joseph. Go to bed.
Angela Bassett was in it. She played the mother. That is sort of like a cultural icon. I know, at least in the Black American community, that's a cultural iconic movie that we've all seen, Jackson's The American Dream. So a lot of people have already seen that. So in terms of like the trauma that the family went through dealing with Joseph and his abusive tendencies, we've already known about. Anyone who knew about the Jackson family growing up or heard anything about the Jacksons in their lives probably heard something about Joseph being at least not as tender with his children, a little bit more on the abusive side, completely on the abusive side. Okay. So this is something that we all know about, the Jacksons. And I feel like that's part of where my problem comes in with the critics, is because they're talking about things that weren't in the movie that they know that we all know. Like, we know that you know that we know. So why reiterate these things in this film? Why reiterate in terms of the controversy, which is one of the reasons why they came out with this 30% Rotten Tomato score when the movie first dropped, and we were like, we're not having it, is because, oh, they didn't include, you know, the controversy about, you know, the allegations with children, with Michael, even though he was acquitted of those things, right? But all of that stuff with the trial happened after this movie, after the time this movie ended, which was 1988. All that stuff came later. So why are you throwing the responsibility of addressing that into a movie that doesn't even cover that time frame? But anyway, I digress. So what was I saying? Yeah, the upbringing of the Jacksons with Joseph is known to all of us, right? So you go into it expecting Coleman Domingo to play Joseph, you know, the typical, like, you know, in these sorts of roles, abusive father, doing da. You know, an actor is doing a good job when they make you feel like you're not watching someone portray a role, you're watching that person. The way he portrayed it, it made you feel as though, oh yeah, that's what that was like. That's who that is. And the way it was just natural. I mean, he's an amazing actor anyway, but he really like transformed that role. And speaking of which, Jafar Jackson, at some points, like, I was sitting there watching it and I was like, wait, like, you forget, and I'm sure you've heard people say this, like, you forget that you're watching someone else. You think that you're watching Michael. You think you're watching Michael Jackson on the screen. It wasn't just the performances. It was the mannerisms. It was the way he carried himself. It was the facial expressions. It was, and for anyone who's a major Michael fan, you know these things through and through. You know these things like about him because you're always watching clips and you're always watching videos of him talking and joking and, you know, going on tour. It must have been a huge undertaking for Antoine Fuqua, the director, to know that you have fans that, you know, even down to what type of thread he used in his jackets, like they emulate him. They know, you know, they know what his face looked like. They know what he said at this point in time. Like, to know that there will be fans watching this movie that know these things, that's a huge undertaking to try to be as accurate as possible, right? And there are some things that are out of sequence, and movies do embellish that sometimes. Like, they take a song that they may have recorded, you know, a few months after, and just to make it a little bit more lively, a little bit more interesting, because they know that we're more familiar with music, which is fine. Movies do that all the time to make, you know, the narrative more interesting. But with Jafar, it's like you're watching Michael. We're singing Human Nature, and like the Thriller scene is like my jaw just dropped because I'm just like, this is unbelievable. Like, it's hard to even describe what he did with that role. And I remember hearing about Jafar years ago before I think he did try to have like a singing career or came out with some singles. And I saw some things online posted where people said, oh, he sounds just like his uncle. And I've heard his voice prior to this movie. So I knew going into it that he was going to resemble him, at least to some extent, but it's just unbelievable. It's like, it was like borderline like scary. It was borderline scary. What are we looking at right now? What are we witnessing? So he definitely deserved a nom for this, for his portrayal, because if you're looking at a biopic and you want that person to portray the character, that individual that the movie is about, you know, to like the most quintessential form, right, to embody that person, then obviously he did it. He played Michael. He was Michael. So it was amazing. So as I said, if you are a fan of film, for those 3 performances alone, you should see this movie. On top of that, we have the direction of these performances. Like, it is a love letter to Michael, and you can see, yeah, the rest of the Jacksons are in it. You have Tito and Jermaine. Mysteriously, Janet Janet is not in it. Janet doesn't exist according to this movie. There was some controversy, like she didn't approve of the movie being, I don't know what was going on. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but there was some beef between her and Jermaine, and she was not in the movie, and she didn't attend any of the premieres or do any of the press, and she just, from what I hear, is not in support of it. Neither is his daughter, Paris, which is interesting because his son, Prince, is listed as a producer on the film, and he's been doing press. So we don't know what's been going on behind the scenes. I'm sure that each member of the family feels that they want to sort of be protective of him to a certain extent in their own way. And Janet has always been pretty protective of him and protective of his image. So, no, we don't know. But yeah, there's no Janet in the movie. There's no Rebe. There's just LaToya. It's LaToya and the brothers. And we see them, I guess we can get into the story of the film. They they're growing up in Gary, Indiana, and Joseph works for the steel mill. Did they ever say that in this movie? I'm just using what I learned from Jackson's The American Dream and applying it to this. I don't know. I think he did mention that he does work in a steel mill. Because I was like major, like I work in a steel mill. Listen, if you have not seen Jackson's The American Dream, after I do the review of this movie, I'm going to look up to see how you can find it, because you have to watch it. That is like a must watch. But yeah, he works in a steel mill. He's raising the boys. He's very pushy. He's very controlling. The discomfort between the boys and him and Catherine and his wife is very evident in the very beginning of the movie. They set that up, and he's sort of like, and it's just a story of how you can have families that just continue with generational trauma. Pretty much whatever Joseph went through in his life was a result of what his parents went through in their life, and he passed it down to the kids. So he was abusive to them, particularly to Michael. The movie kind of stressed how he was hyper focused on Michael, and I'm not sure if the reason was because he felt Michael would always be sort of the focus of the band, or if there was something about Michael that triggered something for him. But the movie stressed that Michael was always sort of the most is the highest recipient of his indiscretions, right? So that was that, which was pretty sad. And that's why I'm saying Juliano, who plays the young Michael, did an amazing job portraying how you would imagine a young Michael would react to the things that was happening to him at the time. So they go through how they're performing what they call the Chitlin circuit, back in the day when, these R&B performers would perform in these seedy, bars and clubs and all these things at night, which is like crazy because these are kids and they're performing in these late night seedy places. And sort of they work their way up. And the movie does a lot of this sort of montage kind of approaches to the passing of time. And I think that's probably the result of a lot of stuff that they had to cut out, because as you know, or you may not know, they had more, I believe the movie was supposed to be like over 3 hours long, and they had a lot more content. But and that content did include some information regarding the allegations with the kids and everything that they had to cut out, because the families of one of the individuals that was named in the court or whatever sued them to not be named in the film. So anything relating to that court case or that person or that family had to be taken out of the movie. And from what I understand, it was a lot and they had to do like almost a month of reshoot. So I think what they pieced together with these, which some people have had some issues with, was the large spans of time that we just happen to like jump across. Like they just go from they go over the span of like 2 years with a video montage, which I feel is a result of what happened with that case. But in the beginning, they go through this montage of how the Jackson Five sort of work their way up through the Chitlin circuit, through doing, performances here and there, and they end up on this performance stage with Gladys Knight, where they run into Suzanne DePass, who works with Motown, and she sees them performing and they get signed, and then the rest is history. Which I hear is not exactly how it happened. I hear that they didn't meet Suzanne until after they were already signed, but whatever. Whatever. Like, they did an amazing performance of Never Can Say Goodbye, which is like a legendary Jackson 5 song, which sounded great. And, Juliano did an amazing job performing it. And it was a nice setting. And they switched some things around, but it was a good scene. So that once they get signed to Motown, then we sort of go into this fast forwarding pace where we go through Michael's sort of struggle, sort of loosening the grip of Joe on him. And this is where I kind of see the influence of the family in this movie. From when I hear the family was heavily involved with the story and producing it. And I can kind of see that. I can kind of see how this, even though it was called Michael, is, a good 3/4 of the movie is about the Jacksons and about how, his will to try to break free didn't really happen until the very end. And it just seemed, if they do make a second one, I hope that now that this is part of his solo career, that now that the family's not as involved, that we can get more of the Michael, sort of more behind the scenes with how he did what he did, right? Which is something that was a little bit thin for me from this movie. Was like, one example is right before he went to do Thriller, you sort of just like skip to it. Like, we're just, okay, here's a video. Like, I would have liked to have seen more of the behind the scenes of getting that together, the ideas, in terms of Beat It, and the movie kind of did touch on that, but I wish they would have did more of a deep dive into how, like, they would show, like, for example, he would be watching the news and there was like a story in LA about how the gangs had gang violence going on in LA, and he would just like, in the movie would do this a lot, he'll be watching something that is sort of inspiring him to do the next thing in his career, right? So he sees this story about the gangs fighting, and he's thinking like, and the news person is talking about how like the gang violence is making people feel scared, and it's not bad for the community. And then we go into him inviting rival gangs like the Bloods and the Crips together in this warehouse to meet each other in order to start filming for Beat It, right? And it does it again when he's watching like black and white scary movies, and this was sort of like his escape, that the movie sort of like pushes that his safe place was sort of watching movies, like black and white movies at night with his mother. So he would watch like Charlie Chaplin movies and old dance movies, like black and white Fred Astaire movies, which we as fans already know. We as fans know how much those old Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, all of those like older black and white vintage dance styles and dance performances influenced him. So one night he was watching this scary movie where this lady pulls off the monster mask. It's a black and white movie, Vincent Price movie, and then we get into Thriller, but we just sort of like jump into like the finished product of Thriller, right? I wish they had more time to dive into how did that get together, right? A little bit more granular, a little bit more niche. And maybe if they do a second movie, they can do that, because I'm just trying to figure out, if they do a second movie, how would they approach it if they wanted to include some of the stuff that they were criticized for not putting into this film. They can take the approach of like the Broadway show, MJ on Broadway, which is also amazing. If you haven't seen that, the show on Broadway, the MJ show on Broadway, they sort of really they focused on one part of him preparing for tour, right? Instead of doing a whole life story, they took a time frame, like a few months actually, of him preparing for his dangerous tour. And maybe they can do that. I don't know. It will be extremely interesting to see what they do. And that's sort of one thing that I wish they did do, was spend more time with the current Michael as opposed to the upbringing, right? Because we all know the upbringing. They took liberties to assume that we already knew certain things about Michael, but when it came to like the upbringing and getting into Motown, they felt like they had to sort of set that in there, which we already knew. It could have been like where they started him as an adult and let the childhood memories come through as flashbacks, right? He would be doing something, preparing for Off the Wall, or preparing for Thriller, and something would trigger him, and then he would have like a flashback of something that happened in his childhood. It could have been done that way. Then that way they would have been able to fit more details into his adult life. But you know, we don't know what happened behind the scenes. We don't know what they had to cut out. They probably had to cut out a lot more than we knew, because if they had to do a bunch of reshoots, then, you know, they did the best they could. But I still enjoyed the movie. Another thing that I did like, that I'm not sure if too many people picked up on, was a lot of the foreshadowing when he was still living with the family after he got Bubbles, the chimp. They always sort of stressed his infatuation with Peter Pan and with the Peter Pan story, and how he visualized himself as Peter Pan. And that's something that he sort of grew up with. Like, it wasn't just something that he kind of like, you know, decided like later on in his adult life. He, from childhood, grew up escaping into Neverland, which, you know, as we know, when he, you know, went off on his own, he bought some land and called it Neverland. He really believed he was Peter Pan. So in the movie, there's a lot of foreshadowing, because they show how he would just, as a grown man, sit and read this Peter Pan book and escape into this book and see Joseph as Captain Hook, which sort of sets up, if they do a second movie, how that sort of escapism in the mental state that he was in could be kind of problematic. Also, when he was in the burn center after he had the accident with Pepsi, they would do this shot where they would zoom in on the Demerol drip that he was receiving for the pain, for the 3rd-degree burns that he had, which is also foreshadowing a lot of the issues that he would encounter later on in life with his addiction issues. So it was a lot of foreshadowing going on in the movie. It was very subtle, and I think the subtlety of those scenes, of the subtlety of the foreshadowing, it could have been, because usually when you see these types of movies, like the foreshadowing was like in your face, like rah, you know, but it was very, very subtle. And I think they did that to sort of soften the blow for the hardcore fans, you know, like the fans that love MJ, like they dressing up, they're doing the dances, they, you know, it softens the blow, because we all know what happened, we all know what he went through, and we all know how it ended. So we don't need to have that reiterated, you know, in such a drastic way, which I thought was tasteful. I think a lot of this movie, you know, and people can say it's a little bit thin, it's a little bit, you know, like toothless or whatever, in terms of like the tea that it spills, or you know, in terms of what it shows you in terms of the creative process. But when you sit and think about it, who can actually answer the questions for Michael's creative process? If the family was involved with producing this movie, they weren't around. There was a scene in the movie, he goes to the toy store and he buys up all these toys, right? He buys up Twister and games and all these cars and all these things, and he comes home very childlike, right, saying, well, you know, guys, let's play Twister tonight, you know, as like a sibling, as like a brother, you know, a conversation that you would hear like 8-year-olds have with their 8-year-old siblings. But these are grown men, right? He's a grown man saying, let's play Twister tonight, just like we used to do. And the guys sort of like turn around and say, no, like, I have a date, I have to work, I'm doing this. You know, they're doing adult things, they're doing grown man things when he wants to play Twister. And what does he do? He goes and he plays Twister with Bubbles, you know? And it's like, when you think about it, it's like, is it sad? Is it tragic? Is it, it's, he handled it. And this is what I'm saying, like the nuances of how Jafar Jackson plays his role. Like, he shows it in a nuanced way where he's like, oh guys, you know, and he's smiling, but there's a pain behind that smile. There's a pain behind it. And what does he do? He buries it, and then he just goes and he just does it on his own and plays Twister with a monkey, right? So it's just like, in terms of people wanting to see his creative process and figuring out how he writes and how he does, who would know that? Who would say it? Who would understand his brain enough to say, this is how he wrote these lyrics? It just came to him. Like, when you think about like people who are geniuses or people who, you know, have like revolutionized their art form, it just comes to them. It's a download straight from the universe, straight from God. It's not anything you can say, I'm going to write this down and tell you how I did this. It's just something that happens. So we're not going to get that, right? We're going to get the end result, which is what we see on stage, which was perfection. And speaking of which, let's talk about these performance scenes, like Jafar dancing, the singing, the way it's shot, the way it's directed, the meticulous nature that they did of going to the actual scenes. When they filmed the Thriller scene, they went to the alley where they filmed Thriller. When they went to the actual theater where he did the Motown special, right? So the essence of these things, even in the Motown special, because I've seen that plenty of times, I was looking in the back, the detail they had of even getting that one band player that's like clapping off beat, like that one guy, right? They even had that. Like, it was a lot of attention to detail that when you see it, and I'm probably going to see it again just so I could, you know, pick up on those things. When in the last scene, when he did the concert on the Bad Tour, there were certain fans like that do certain movements with their head from these clips. And as a fan, you've seen these clips so many times, you can recognize, I know that fan. I know that band player. I know that guitar player, the woman with the white hair, even the backup singer, the guy that's always smiling, that's in the background, right? So it's attention to detail in this movie that as a fan, you recognize and you're like, okay, thank you. Thank you for showing us. Like, thank you for acknowledging that you know that we know these things. Thank you for acknowledging that you know that we will be aware of these things when we see it. And thank you for giving it to us. You know, whenever people have these questions of,
oh, do you think that this artist is the next MJ? Do you think that this person...
Why is it that they're always trying to compare people to Michael Jackson or figure out who's the next Michael Jackson? There will never be another one. There will never be another one. There was only one. And there will never be anyone that will come close to the impact Michael Jackson had. And he did all of that before the internet. All of it before social media. It was just him, his music, and his fans. And it was immeasurable. So, and this movie is a celebration of that. You know, could it have had more details? Yes. Could it have had a little bit more meat to it, to the bones? Yes. But what it gives you is a celebration of what we all love. What it gives you is a little bit of a story that we already know, right? You know, we've seen the documentaries. This is all stuff that we know, but it's a celebration of the things that have changed a lot of our lives. And I really appreciate that. And it's great. And go see it. And I'm so glad that people didn't let those initial critics' reviews deter them from seeing this movie, because that didn't make no kind of sense. It didn't. I was just like, it was giving smear campaign. It was giving, or if not smear campaign, then extreme aloofness and detachment to things that are magic, right? And why would you want that? You know, and I think that those initial critics' reviews is the perfect sort of illustration of what's happening to our world, where everybody is like cynical for no reason. If you walk into a movie like that, right, and you see the production, you see the direction, you see the acting, that alone, you know, should make you just want to give it a little bit of praise for something, right? But I think that was like an example of how cynical, like, people just want to jump to be cynical. People just want to jump to be the first ones to cast a shadow on somebody's light. And that is also in the movie too, right? Don't let anybody take your light. Don't let anybody take your shine. And Michael was shining. We were not having it. We weren't having it. This is now the biggest biopic opening ever. The biggest by a mile. So congrats to everyone involved. I do hope that they do make another one. And if they do, they'll be able to sit down. Because I know it's like when you're working on a project and all of a sudden the rug is pulled out from under you, you have to like sort of make do what you have. When the second movie comes, I think it's going to be even better because they're able to set it out and actually follow through with the vision that they had. So I can't wait. But anyway, that was my review. Let me know what you think. Have you seen it? Are you going to see it? Did the critics' initial reviews deter you? Did you change your mind? Let me know what your favorite scene was. Let me know, how you felt after you saw it. Are you a fan, or did this make you a fan? Let me know. Let's have a discussion, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.